So, in my channel, I'm going to be talking about all things of what it's really like to live in Switzerland or live here in Switzerland, not as a trust fund baby, not as a Swiss native, but my perspective is as an American expat. And I've lived here for now 5 years. My name is Johanna, by the way. I'm 41 years old. I am 30 weeks in a few days pregnant. And in this segment of what it's really like to live here in Switzerland, we are going to talk about pregnancy and labor and delivery. Um, I have had both experiences. So I have two children already, and I gave birth to my first son in New York City at Tisch NYU Hospital, and I gave birth to my second son here in Switzerland in the city we live in. And I would like to talk about how those two experiences were so very different, and why I'm looking forward to this next experience. I actually meant to record this video earlier when my children were still in childcare, but between the heat and trying to get things together for the baby and nesting and my third trimester feeling like my first trimester, which means extreme fatigue. So when I do have an opportunity, I sleep. And as everyone I think in the world knows, the heat wave that has been happening here in Europe knocked me out for a couple hours. So let's see how much of this I can get through before my boys come home. So let's talk about the first pregnancy experience in New York. For those who don't live in the United States, this could sound very similar. It can sound like a quite different story, but yeah, I was one of those women who wanted to be very prepared. I wanted to know everything beforehand. I probably watched so many birthing videos, stories, podcasts, almost tricking myself into maybe if I watched enough of these that like it would somehow over prepare me for the experience. We did Lamaze classes. I read the books, IMA, hypnobirthing, all the things. I felt very prepared for the birth of my child and what I thought that experience was going to be like, especially going to a hospital as being renowned as Tisch NYU in Manhattan. I thought everything would go as planned, but I learned, just like many first-time moms learn, things definitely did not go as planned. And the experience is just quite different than here in Switzerland. In the United States, I would say, first, number one, it's very expensive, unfortunately, to give birth to a child, especially if you don't have good insurance. At the time, I was working my corporate job. I had very good insurance. My husband had very good insurance, and therefore our childbirth was nearly nothing. But without the insurance, it would have been over $25,000 in New York to have had the baby and stay overnight as we had in the hospital. But the experience itself just feels, even through the pregnancy, even through your gynecological visits, can feel very impersonal. They can feel very rushed. It's a much different experience. It's, I can put up, there was a funny video of a woman imitating what it's like to go to a gynecology appointment or OBGYN appointment in the United States, and it's someone, even if you've gone to them for years, with a laptop in front of them, and they're clicking away, and they just pull your legs forward and let me check this, da, 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 da. Okay, you're good, and you're off on your way. There's not a lot of conversation, and it's an in and out kind of situation. And the childbirth itself can also feel that way, unfortunately, for many women, and that's what I was also surprised by in the hospital environment. And my experience was not what I expected it to be. And unfortunately, in the United States, after you have the baby, you're just sent home. And it's like, good luck. And hopefully, you have a support system. And if you do not have a support system, um, yeah, it can be quite intense. And at the time, my husband and I, we were living in New York City. We had friends around, but my family was hours away in Pittsburgh, and his family was on a plane hours away in Switzerland. So we were pretty much on our own. Um, and now to my first experience here in Switzerland, being pregnant. Very similar circumstances. I was working um, almost full time here. You can work in percentages, and I was working 80% at the time. And it's interesting. Just I noticed the difference right away from my even down to my OBGYN appointments that I had leading up. Now, the thing is, when you fall pregnant here or become pregnant here in Switzerland, you are not seen or checked up with that first sonogram until after 8 weeks, because they say the baby's too small to actually see anything. As we all know, as women, that's also in that window where things can unfortunately happen, and so they normally require you to wait. So you have that first appointment, and then if you have health insurance here in Switzerland, which I believe you have to, or most people do, if you have health insurance like we had, after 12 weeks, anything relating to the birth of the child is for free after 12 weeks. So you could even, if you feel like if you can wait, if you're not that curious, if you feel like you're having, a healthy pregnancy, you can wait till 12 weeks if you want to not pay for anything, but that's normally not what most people do. You want to make sure everything is fine as soon as you can. So just your first appointment's 8 weeks, and then at 12 weeks, anything from physical therapy. You can even go and see a therapist if you're feeling like, oh, this is affecting my mood or my hormones. That's covered because you can receive a prescription for therapy from your OBGYN, special yoga courses, if they accept insurance. All of that can be covered during your pregnancy, every single sonogram appointment. If you unfortunately have complications, every single specialist appointment, all of those things are covered. Where, in contrast, in the United States, in one of my appointments with my OBGYN, everything was going completely fine around 6 months. It was a 6-month checkup, and she felt like the baby's heart sounded irregular. And in hindsight, I felt like maybe I should have went back maybe the next day or a second appointment just to see. But she immediately recommended me to a cardiologist. And then from there, because baby's still so small and still developing, then it went from a very no drama routine pregnancy to every couple weeks we were going to this cardiologist to get these scans done to see how the baby's heart was developing. And that came out of pocket, unfortunately. And that was pretty expensive, where if that was the circumstance here in Switzerland, that would have been also fully covered. The birth is fully covered as well. So it's completely free here in Switzerland. And another really, really great and valuable feature that's also under the health insurance is what in the United States we call a midwife or a doula, which, at least for me and my experience in New York, I would have loved a doula, but that was that's private. You have to pay for that with your own private money, which at the time we were in the financial place to pay $3,000 or $4,000 to have someone come and help after the birth or help during the birth and labor, give tips for recovery, all of those things. Something that honestly, with it being, going then into a country and society where that is just the baseline, it's just something that I felt like is such a loss for every woman in the United States. Because once we did have that support and have that experience here in Switzerland, I almost felt like a first-time mom again. I had so many questions and things I realized I just completely winged or figured out on my own, or Googled or asked another friend how they did it, but everyone's child is different, everyone's body is different, everyone's experience is different. So having someone one on one like this, and you get to choose your, what they call here a hebama, which is a midwife. So once you become pregnant, once you get to that point, the sooner you look for one and find one, the better, because depending on where you live, there may not be that many. Sometimes they can be completely booked, especially the ones who also, that you can find ones that can help you in labor and delivery. But the common practice is you find one that you like, they're paid under the insurance. They come maybe a month or so before your due date, give you, a lot of information for prep. Maybe a month or maybe 2 months before your due date, they'll give you information, holistic guidance, things you can do to prep your body for childbirth. They'll talk you through childbirth if you need that, and tips and tricks, and it's just wonderful. And just makes you feel very confident going into your birth experience, which is just something that I think every country, if they don't have that, could benefit from. Even if you've, like, this was my second, but it was just such, she has so much information, which these women do because they are medically trained. And that's another topic that I'll get on, is the experience in the hospitals here, which have midwife-led births, which means that when you go into the labor and delivery, the maternity center ward, the labor and delivery experience is led by the midwives, the medically trained midwives. And a doctor only presents themselves if there's an emergency, if you need intervention, an epidural, and even in cases if you tear slightly, they are also trained to repair as well. So it's just a very different holistic experience, even if you go the medical route, where this medical route here in Switzerland and the States would almost be seen as very holistic. But they tried to do a really good job to balance it too. So maybe a month before giving birth, you have your visit. It can be 2 hours, 3 hours, however long, with your chosen midwife to help you prepare for the birth and delivery, whatever that may be or that you need. And then after that, you also have an appointment at the hospital if you choose to go to a hospital, where you meet the midwives there. You give your wishes for the birth, all of those things. And then the birth experience was just very different here. It's interesting because going in, like, even I chose the hospital route. They have birthing centers here, which are probably very similar, ran very similarly to the ones in the States. But yes, the difference here is that it is covered under insurance if you choose to do that, I believe. But I should only just speak on what I know. And choosing the hospital experience, completely covered by insurance, going in, even still, it didn't feel so clinical and medical. Even they said, okay, here's your room, get yourself comfortable. And my husband and I were kind of left alone, where I felt like in the States, it's meaning like you're processed in, da-da-da-da-da, here's your band here with the baby monitor and everything up, where this was just a much more slower process, and I wasn't expecting it. It almost made me a little nervous, where I was just like, oh, I guess we'll just, continue to labor here. But I went into it very differently as well than I did with the birth of my first son. I felt much more knowledgeable, especially after just conversations I had with my midwife that I had chosen, of just, now having the confidence in my body and myself, not to rush, without, if you don't have any complications like bleeding or anything, but just you're starting to have the contractions, not to rush to the hospital right away. Giving credit to Farmhouse on Boone. It's a blog of a woman who now I believe she has 11 children, and just watch women like that give birth and how they manage the birthing experience. I once again was watching all the videos and things and women's experience and how they dealt with labor, and I loved her approach, which was when you start to have these contractions, to just, it's a natural experience, and just, if you can, to go about your day just as normal as you can until you can't. And I feel like that was a great way for me to do that without rushing to the hospital. Um, and yeah, it was a really, really different night and day experience. Okay, so yes, to wrap this up, the hospital experience here in Switzerland to give birth was very different. Much slower pace, didn't feel rushed at all. Even when, and the midwives would come and check, I did get the baby monitor, and I had planned also for this birth to be a natural one, going without an epidural or anything. And it's interesting because I was so concerned about the language barrier, but they're so experienced, and they're other women and work with women and giving birth, and they're medically trained, almost like nurses. But in the, I guess, what is the word I'm looking for? The specification of labor and delivery. They said, oh, even in my first meeting with them prior to giving birth, oh, don't worry about the language, that a lot of the women are so experienced, they will read, and even if I spoke the language, they read the woman's body language to know also where they are in labor before even a woman can speak. Because even if you can speak, a lot of times if you're in that intense moment, those intense moments of labor, you can't speak anyhow. And they more so have learned to also read a woman's body. So it was interesting. I was at a point that I look in hindsight was probably transition, which is the most intense. And at that moment I said, I think I want an epidural. I think I want one. And she said, are you sure? And I said, yeah, I think I do. And, she said, okay. And they started, and they were like, oh, anesthesiologist might take a moment. And they were like, oh, maybe do you want to use the bathroom? And I was like, okay. And I went to use the bathroom, which I also learned in hindsight, this actually helps progress that stage. So I went and peed, and when I came out, and she said, do you feel like you want to push? And I said, I actually do. I feel a lot of pressure. I feel like I do. So then the other midwives came, and yeah, I started to push the baby. And the interesting thing is, I was just trying to oh, that's another thing. I actually, since I couldn't get the epidural, they offered the laughing gas, as we say in the States. So and you can control yourself and breathe a little in, and it kind of just takes the edge off a bit. And so I had that, and it was not rushed at all. It was a completely opposite experience from my doctor. Push, push, push. And the other person, when is she done? This was like, she said, oh, are you feeling contraction? And she was like, do you feel like you need to push? I was like, no. She was like, okay, well, then stop. And this also prevented me probably from tearing. I ended up getting a very superficial, I would say, paper cut tear. But since I labored mostly through the day at home, and that was my mindset, I just treated it like a normal occurrence until I couldn't. By the time we were in the hospital, I think between getting there and the baby coming was maybe 45 minutes to an hour. And I think I pushed for a few minutes, and he was out. And I got the little tear fixed, and then I was able to get up and shower. And it was an experience I'd never had before. And then after, at least at that time, then with a vaginal delivery, uncomplicated, you can stay 3 to 4 days. And I was honestly ready to go home after probably the second day. I just didn't so much like the food. And then I think people forget, if it's warm in Europe as it is right now, even in the hospitals, there's not air conditioning. So I had my husband bring me a fan, and it was fine. But I just, after a couple days, especially since thank goodness I didn't have a tough recovery or anything, I was just ready to go home and be in my own space. And that was the hospital experience.